Everyone should have seen a notification that we are recording these sessions, and you just have to click that you agree, and we will continue on our merry way. And so with that, my name is Colette Bartow. I'm the Director of the Content Standards and Instruction Division at the Office of Public Instruction. It's my pleasure and privilege to help facilitate the work of this task force. I'm really happy to be joined by our OPI staff members, in particular Marissa Graybill and Carly Cockrell, who help to make sure that we have materials and meeting links and communications out to the group, and as well as organizing the information from meeting to meeting. Also, we have Dylan Clapmeyer with us, our Office of Public Instruction Director of Communications. So Dylan, I just wanted to check in with you again and see if there was anything that you needed to let us know or messages from the superintendent before we get on our way.
Thanks, Colette. Nope, no updates from me.
Sounds good, sounds good. So let's go ahead, Carly, and make our way to the next slide. By now, hopefully everyone is very familiar with the Zoom logistics. Just shout or holler if you're having any difficulties in the chat. That's the best way to get a hold of us, and definitely want to encourage you to use the chat feature to be able to ask questions and engage in dialogue. At this point, we're going to go to our next slide, which says pause. And I'm going to ask Marissa to explain and to share a message about this pause in our meeting.
Yeah, we just wanted to take a second to acknowledge what is happening across our nation and in Montana. You know, we know our work is important in this group, and we know that our minds or your mind might be on other topics this week. We do not want to gloss over the inequities in our country and in our state for our students of color. So we want to acknowledge that while our minds might be in different places, let that set in, but we want to thank you for continuing this important work to help us create these recommendations in the fall. And we know that every group has discussed equity as a component, and as we continue to do that in our work, we know that we'll be particularly mindful of our students of color and our faculty of color, and just and thinking that, wanted to acknowledge that before we get started, because we know that this has been a pretty heavy week for pretty much everyone. So just wanted to acknowledge that, and again, thank you again for continuing this work and creating those recommendations.
Thanks, Marissa. Definitely we're talking about a lot of things that are focused on how do we provide equitable access to all students to the education that they deserve. And so we're going to continue in that vein and be thinking about equity in particular, but we can go ahead and go to the next slide, and our agenda is very similar to what we have used in the past. We're going to have our breakout group work time with a little bit more narrow focus and some identification of next steps. We're still looking at these three broad categories. And then, like I said, we're going to ask you to hone in a little bit more and to be more specific about recommendations and around the topics that you've identified in the individual breakout groups. We'll do our group share out at the end, and then talk about our meeting agenda for our fourth and final meeting of the task force. Go ahead. So concurrently, there is a Montana Flex task force. That was one thing I wanted to mention before we kind of go into breakout groups and that. And so that Montana Flex task force has met 2 times. They are meeting in 1-hour sessions and then doing a lot of work in the, I believe, 6 breakout groups that they have. And the main focus of that Flex task force is to look at flexibility in statutes or in administrative rules or policies that can help schools be ready to open doors in whatever form that takes in the coming school year. And so that group, as I said, they have, I believe it's 6 topics that they're honing in on. And their work is to define action steps around the ideas that they're discussing with flexibility of existing policies and laws and that sort of thing. So there are some areas where our conversations are definitely connected in terms of the topics and the concerns that they are discussing. And so we want to just let you know that the information from that task force is also posted on the same page that information for our meetings is posted, and we'd welcome you to take a look at those meeting notes and that work as it goes along, and especially between our third and fourth meetings to kind of inform the work that you're going to do as we prepare for that fourth meeting. So just wanted to kind of let you know that we're working in parallel but also connected ways with a little bit different outcome in terms of what each group is creating. So the Flex Task Force is action steps for flexibility around existing policy, and our group is developing guidance that will go onto a variety of audiences for consideration to inform how schools will open and operate in the coming school year. So that's that. If we want to go on to the next slide. We have our norms, and we want to just enjoy the time together, certainly. And I think as we get closer to our fourth meeting, I just want to call out you know, how important it is to be aware of airtime, each member of groups having the opportunity to speak from their own knowledge and make sure that everyone's voice is heard as we work forward. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So our purpose and our goals today, we're going to continue to use that template that we had in week 2, but we want to really narrow a topic focus. And by that we mean if there are multiple topics that that you've discussed over the last couple of weeks, we'd like you to kind of take ownership for one of those topics, either individually or with one or two other people, and delegate the write-up of recommendations for those topics. We're going to, again, use that same template that we started with last week, but the focus is to craft recommendations for that specific topic. Ultimately, we want to bring all of these these pieces together. And so with that, again, we're asking everyone to kind of take ownership for something, put your stake or your pin in a topic, and then we want to have write-ups on each of those topics as we go forward. Marissa, Carly, did you have anything to add to what I just said?
Oh, that sounds good. And then I think we have an example on the next slide that Carly was going to pull up. That narrowing that focus could look like, so within your group, you might take a particular topic your group has been talking a lot, but, you know, including obviously your best summary of a recommendation from your discussions. That could include, right, guidance for our school sizes, our parents, our students, educators, school admin, community members, grade bands, right? It doesn't need to include all of that, of course not, but it might, right, have some guidance in there or things that you discussed, as well as, we know many of the topics, it might address communication or technology plans, access to learning, traditions and routine. You know, we have routines that we need to discuss, professional development for educators, what accelerated learning looks like, what student connections look like. So while there's no way that we would say, you'd say your one topic that you should address all of these things, that would be a bit much for all of us. But we know that within your recommendation, that's maybe could be written as a paragraph or formatted into the template we gave you, or we actually have one other version for you to think about if it's easier. You might be addressing guidance for the following people and some of these topics.
I think at the end of the day, you know, it's really important in our first couple of meetings to really kind of form how we're discussing things, get all of the topics and ideas out on the table, and really now the charge is to focus and to put your thoughts together in a way that we can bring forward to develop guidance. So Marissa, did you want to kind of talk about the guidance that came from the university
Sure.
system this
Yeah,
week?
we received this week, and we wanted to, yeah, I think if you click on it there, Carly, just wanted to show you that this is the document that they've created or so far constructed. And I know that we had a lot of questions in the feedback, like, what is this going to look like? And again, we don't have a perfect answer for that, or else we would have said this is exactly the template we want. But we saw this template from MUS and thought this might give a better idea, or it might be helpful for some of you as you're crafting your recommendations. So if you scroll down to, they have a topic, and then on the left-hand side, they have essential items. And so that's kind of their recommendations. Those are all the wonderful discussions you've been having or things that have come up. And then they also had planning considerations. So last week we used a template that was thinking about, the topic and resources, and then what it would look like in distance learning, blended learning, face-to-face, right? If you'd like to continue to use that as your model, as you create your recommendation, please do. If that did not click for you for any reason, please, if this is an easier model for you to think about when crafting a recommendation, having your topic and then have it the essential items and planning considerations, that's fine too. We liked this model. It seemed very clear. I definitely would recommend having your resource links as well, because we know there's been a lot of great discussions about great resources for educators and for admin. So this was just another model. If you're interested, maybe I'll have Carly just throw it in the chat. But this is the MUS kind of their draft recommendations for next fall.
So you have that link in the chat to the MUS planning document. Marissa, would you like to talk about our timeline?
Sure. So our timeline for from now until what we'd like our plan is, today's meeting, we're going to work in our breakout groups for pretty much the rest of the meeting until we come together to share out what we discussed. But you're going to be working in your groups to decide on the topic areas and begin compiling recommendations. You might go ahead and divide and conquer, or have like, I'll take this part of the recommendation, I'll take this part of the recommendation, and typing that up. Or you might need today to kind of fully discuss and continue to flesh out what are the key things that you want to type up a recommendation. Before next meeting, so ideally before our meeting 4, so maybe some potentially if you are able to do some work in between this meeting and next meeting, work on those recommendation drafts. Type them up, put them into a table, put them into a format that makes sense for you, because if it makes sense for you, it's going to make sense for our admin, our administrators, our students. And then our June 4th meeting, which is our June 10th meeting, excuse me, which is next week. In our last meeting, we're going to share, you'll share your drafts within your breakout group. So you'll have someone else's eyes on that to edit or update as a team. And we also will share those full group. Recommendations, if your team needs some more time, or if you get some good ideas from that sharing and you want to be able to work on a recommendation a little bit longer, that's completely fine. We understand that this work can't be just done in 8 hours. Sorry, Chloe said June 11th. Yeah, sorry, next Thursday, excuse me. The recommendations, we'll have them due on June 18th, so that following Thursday. So you'll have a week to continue to work on those recommendations, and we'll share this again at the end of our meeting today. And then just so you know where these recommendations are going next, is we will compile them into a singular document. It could look like the MUS document, and we will share those recommendations with the superintendent and also with the Montana School Board, School Safety Advisory Board, and that will be happening at the end of the month.
And so I was just going to add to that too. One of the things that we'll be doing is also kind of coordinating and reviewing the information from the Montana Flex team as well, as we move recommendations and ideas forward to those various audiences that want to and need to hear this information.
This was just a reminder of the template last week, but again, some of you started using a different template or just jotting your notes down in paragraph form. That's completely fine, whatever makes sense for your group. So at this point, we'll break out into breakout groups. I have almost everyone assigned, so I'm going to go ahead and open those rooms. We're going to let you guys go for that really up until 2:30. Oh yeah, we'll pause for questions real quick. That's a good idea, Cole. And you can either unmute yourself or type it into the chat. And if questions arise when you're in your breakout groups, feel free to raise the hand at the bottom or talk to the OPI person who's in there and they can get in contact with us. Okay, so we'll open those rooms. If you are not assigned a room yet, be patient. I'll get you into your room right away and we'll come back at 2:30. Welcome everyone back. Thank you for your work in the past hour and 20 minutes or so. I know our group had some really great discussions, went like in lots of different directions and then came back together, and this is such hard work and there's not a clear pathway of where we're going or what we want to recommend. So again, I thank you for your flexibility and for having continuing to have these honest and challenging conversations and figuring out what we want to put as recommendations coming forward from all of your perspectives and all your unique perspectives and all of your great work coming through. So we'd love to at this time just spend a couple minutes hearing from each group, maybe say what if you got to topics and ideas, what those are, and summarize those for everyone to kind of learn and potentially collaborate together on. So let's start with our academic group 1.
That's me, right?
Yes,
That's
Paige,
you.
you're correct.
Go, Paige.
Okay, so hold on, because I got out of my, let me get back into my document. Not sure where it went. Give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. I know we got into, so I'm only going to do a couple of these because we want to fine tune some of the others. But for best practice, we went into determining that there needs to be a single platform for online learning by grade band. And so I'll kind of make these simple, providing professional development for teachers as far as understanding what that single platform is, having accountability. Administration and teachers will remain using the program agreed upon. And by fall, it's I do, you do, we do, teaching delivery to instruct all students on calendar use. Next best practice was standardized electronic calendar expectations. Instead of having many different areas in which kids can get their information, you would have one area or use one particular calendar format so that a kid doesn't look for their assignment in Google Classroom and then possibly go to Google Calendar and then go other areas and still not get the correct information. We also came up with the best practice of create a consistent instructional communication plan. So we would have something that would come out weekly, trying to figure what that would be to communicate with everybody, whether it's the students, the parents, teachers, but we would have something, weekly learning plan posted by all teachers in a similar fixed location. Another best practice would be provide parents, families, students, and teachers with clear, concise guidance for the use of district technology, when it's checked out, how to do it, how to, let me make sure I have all that. Clear, concise guidance for online interactions. Sorry about that. And then also have a clear, acceptable use plan for the use of district devices and technology. So you would be having an acceptable use agreement, as well as a single page statement describing safe, successful online learning interactions. And there's a lot more to it, but I'm just going to kind of highlight our top things. Once we got down, another best practice, one-stop shop. Develop a central knowledge base to provide information to all students and community members. You're going to create an organized spreadsheet. If there are codes to get into classes, then a list of those codes needs to be made aware to everybody, and as well as all information from the district and school levels in a centralized location, whether it be a Facebook page, the school website, but all information can be found there. Our other, I would say the next one, and we stopped on this, we will come back to it, but parent communication. Parent versus teacher responsibilities, time for lesson and schoolwork was another best practice. Provide guidelines and lesson delivery methods. And I think we also had, then we briefly touched on assessment. So that is kind of it in a nutshell. Those last ones we are going to go back over. We have some more work that we want to do.
Thank you. Coming from academic group 2, we definitely have some overlapping topics, which is great. I love to hear that, and I think that we'll definitely be able to merge those together after this is all, after we finish our meeting together. So academic 2, let's go ahead and share what we were discussing.
Okay, so we're speaking to school nutrition solutions. So in a nutshell, the recommendation is a district-specific platform to establish the playing field per se. So for example, asking all schools to maintain the same number of lunch periods or the same times as last year, because the structure of kitchen relies on that, and so that could ease the transition. And then after addressing a district platform, we feel it's necessary to assess the needs by school by meeting with the administrators. And some solutions for the diversity between the schools is to offer several meal models. So we came up with meals in the cafeteria, meals in the classrooms, grab-and-go meals, and curbside meals for remote students. And then social distancing solutions are to alternate A and B days. For example, if a student is attending on Monday and Wednesday, to split those students in half, with half of them going to the cafeteria, half of them eating in the classroom, and then split the group again by the number of lunch periods, which would pretty greatly reduce the number of students in any of those serving areas. And then we talked about how producing several meal models puts a lot of pressure on the kitchen. So we felt a solution to that could be to offer, for example, a la carte meals one week and regular meal service the next week. So the kids have a choice of a hamburger or a chicken sandwich one week, and the next week they have tater tot casserole. So the kitchen isn't jumping between all of those meal options. So that's a solution for reducing the labor in the kitchen. And then the physical serving space in some schools is a real challenge. And for one of our schools has 450 students. And so we're devising some strategies to address the social distancing. And one of the things we've come up with is serving in non-traditional areas like the commons or the area above the gym, or I guess any space that's available where we could transport the meals and the students could spread out and eat there. We also had some grade specific solutions for example, a first grader carrying a tray of food from the cafeteria to the classroom would look much different than it would for a middle schooler. So that would be part of the school specific assessments as to what the student needs are. And from there be able to decide what meal service best suits those groups. And then all meal service requires adjustments for staff, and that would be custodial issues, school nutrition staff, teachers, it would be an adjustment for everyone. And so, and one of the other issues that we thought could be resolved by using larger spaces or other spaces is the giving the teachers a duty-free lunch. So for example, we served in the commons and we had the same duty teachers that we always have supervising the lunch, and that frees up the teachers to have their duty-free lunch. And so those are just some of the solutions that we came up with for school nutrition.
Thank you. And I think because this was the physical instructional group too, awesome. Thank you for sharing. That was great to hear. Let's go back to the academic programming group 2. And thank you so much for sharing. It's so interesting hearing about school nutrition. It's something that my brain just finds incredible. So academic group 2, thank you for sharing. or who from our group was going to share? Chad, I'm nominating you to just maybe say our priorities. Is that okay?
Sure thing. Within academic group 2, we had a lot of discussion on different priorities, trying to align practices for our teachers, our students, our administrators, families, and we focused on several key priority concepts. We focused on high quality instruction, assessment, and reporting. We focused on communication. We focused on consistency, and we focused on professional development. Within the high quality instruction section, we talked a lot about identifying unfinished learning from the prior year and the need to identify a compacted pacing guide for priority standards for the coming year. We talked about grading systems that were flexible and prioritized, standards-based, can speak to those prioritized content, recognizing that traditional letter grades may not be appropriate for communicating what students have learned through blended learning, in-person learning, and remote learning. We recommended that parents and students be engaged to understand that shift towards standards-based learning. And we focused on high quality professional development that incorporate concepts of universal design for learning as a way to differentiate student engagement, content representation, and student expression across those remote learning or in-person or blended learning environments. We talked about how students need to be able to build a sense of community, and that our instruction, particularly at the beginning of the year, should foster those kinds of group opportunities. And then jumping into communication, we talked about consistent platforms like Seesaw or Google, Slack, wanting to identify appropriate methods of communication between teachers and parents, teachers to students, students to students, teachers to admin, teachers to teachers, and that high quality platform is being used throughout the district. That kind of rolls into, kind of blends in with the consistency priority concept. Again, focusing on a consistent platform for the delivery of remote or blended learning. And then the professional development part is a vehicle for achieving some of that consistency, professional development on the use of the platform. We talked a little bit about payment for professional development and setting aside contracted hours for teachers to do this standards work and professional development work.
Thank you, Chad. Let's go ahead and move on to our, let's finish up with a physical instructional group 1. So I think that was the physical instructional group 1.
I guess I got volunteered.
Susan, I can do it if you want me to.
Who's I?
Susan, this is Molly. I can do it. Since you're supposed to just facilitate.
Take it, Molly.
Since JR nominated me. Thanks, JR. Anyway, we focused on 4 different areas: PE, music, CTE, and lunch. So we started with PE, and we said, you know, just be thoughtful of passing areas, possibly address class size, hand wash before and after classes. Do not keep clothing in locker rooms. Take the clothing home every day, wash, bring back clean clothes. We did recognize that could cause a problem for some of our, kids that don't have a lot of support at home, but maybe that's something schools could help with. Cleaning of shared equipment, promote social distancing in areas of congregation like locker rooms. Consider whether competition is appropriate given the current stage that we're in. So, And then we went on to music, and we really looked at how choir is different than band. Choir kind of has some other bigger issues, I think. So we said, more emphasis on social distancing for choir, distance according to spatial allowances and room size. Have all students responsible for cleaning their own instruments instead of having a teacher do it. Hand washing before and after class. And one thing we talked about just overall was possibly rethinking bell schedules to include times for hand washing and sanitizing. And, schools can do what fits for them, things like maybe stagger transition times by wing or area of the school or by last name or grade level, just so that not so many kids are in the hallways and in the bathrooms and washing their hands at the same time. So that was an overall thing. Then we went into lunch, and we discussed how there's so many different lunch considerations for every different school, and you really can't make one policy for everybody. That the biggest thing is to consult with local public health, where they can actually come into your school and see what you're working with and give specific recommendations for what your school has. So, but just some overall considerations, where no self-serve stations and buffets, staff wear masks and gloves, maybe stagger lunches somehow to meet social distancing, work on traffic flow patterns and seating arrangements, keep students seated together by classroom. Some schools already offer breakfast in the classroom, so maybe some of them could utilize those same strategies for lunch in the classroom. But then that comes with, the duty-free lunch issues and things like that. But at schools where there's an open campus, close down some of the entrances so that they have to come back into school through a select few, where you have hand sanitizing stations as they come in. And then we went on to CTE. We said, we looked at in-class and then the out-of-class kind of competition things. So in-class considerations were having students responsible for cleaning everything they touched at the end of class, limit equipment sharing by students, limit class sizes to reduce number of items that are shared by multiple students, and for the competitions outside of the school, do symptom screening for students before and after the events, sanitize before and after competitions, entrance to classrooms. If you're hosting, that'll, have a whole new set of things you have to work on. But those are just the 4 areas we focused on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. All right, we have our last group, I think, now, which is going to be our social, emotional, and behavioral group.
So in our group, we really focused on the balance between health and socialization, and not just for students, but for teachers and parents as well. We talked about, with keeping social distance and health in mind, really utilizing social medias and small group gatherings, whether it's playing with the neighborhood kids or and other things outside. Yeah. And then we talked about maybe just little ideas like teaching your parents how to use Snapchat so they can be connected with their friends as well, not just for students, or making a family TikTok or something fun to do with your family and things like that. We also talked about teachers need training on mental health and suicide. And one of the teachers in our group talked about a struggle with confidentiality. She wasn't able to send emails to her students, but only to the teacher. So it was hard for her to connect directly with her students. And then another group mentioned this, but the multiple platforms that all the teachers were using was really hard for students. And if teachers, it would lower anxiety a lot if teachers could kind of combine that and keep those in just a few places. And then one other point is that pretty much no matter how things end up, school in the fall won't be exactly how it was last year. Like there will be some differences for sure. And so some students that I've talked to, or like some of my friends, they completely think that it's just going to be back to normal and there won't be any differences. So to like communicate, even if we don't have a plan to tell them, but just that there will be differences sooner rather than later, I think that will help with anxiety and give them time to prepare for that as well.
And like a bigger thing, so like obviously what will work for like some schools and districts and like towns even won't work for others. And so when we were kind of talking about like, you know, using social media to connect with everyone and stuff, like there's some places that like the kids don't have that opportunity. And so gathering in smaller groups would be good. And then when the school year like does start up, you know, like the teachers can assign like little like field trip type things where they give like a few, like a certain amount of kids or whatever, like time that they can be together, you know, like outside of just school, to not only like, you know, work on their school, but to also like work on, you know, like staying in touch with one another and like just checking up on one another. So, yeah.
That's pretty much what our group talked about.
Thank you, ladies. That was really helpful. And I know that's something that actually our team talked about afterwards too, is having that communication that school is not going to look the same in the fall. As much as all of us hope that we could go back and everyone's going to be hugging and the hallways are going to be crowded and we're going to be bumping elbows to get to classes and all that, we know that that's not currently what we see. I mean, hopefully soon, but not currently right now. Well, thank you. And I think that means, I think all of our groups shared. So we just wanted to wrap up here today, just saying thank you again for your dedication today and your work and your work throughout. I know some groups have some plans to continue to meet between now and next time. We have, at least our group might just jump into the Google Doc and continue to chat and work on that. But however your team plans to stay in communication, or if you've finished what you wanted to do, that's great. It's completely up to you. We just wanted to remind you that our last meeting is next Thursday, June 11th, again from 1 to 3. If there are questions that are coming up, please always feel free to contact Colette Barto. And if there are any issues, please feel free to let us know. We'll send out a survey just like we did on Monday. So please give us your honest feedback. And again, we can't thank you enough for your work today and the past 3 weeks. Colette, was there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think I just really appreciate everyone's candor and their dedication, their willingness to lean into these discussions, and even leaning into those moments of silence that we experience as we're talking about these big things and need time to process. And also, you know, I know that there is going to be work that is going to be done by each of you between now and next week when we meet again, and that time and effort that you give to this is greatly appreciated as well. I think, you know, we've all heard as we report out each time that there's some commonalities in the concerns or the issues that we want to address together. And by having many heads and eyes and ears and sets of experience, I think we're going to come up with something that is very meaningful and very helpful as we redefine what the new normal is for our schools and for how we do our work. So with that, I say thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again on the screen, the Big Brady Bunch, next week.
Yes, thank you all.